Welcome to the PPC Hero Live Summit. I'm Jeff Baum, President of Hanapin Marketing, and with me is Jeff Baum, or JJ, as I like to call him. We'll probably refer to him. Today, you guys are going to have 4 hours of various short sessions from PPC experts from a wide range of digital marketing topics. So we hope you can make it through the entire day with us. Make sure to follow along with PPC Hero Live Summit, the hashtag on Twitter. You guys can ask us questions on there. We'll make sure to follow up throughout the day and keep the conversation going through Twitter. Today, we're also going to do live giveaways throughout the day. They haven't told me what these are, so I'm pretty excited about it, and I'm going to be figuring out what they are right alongside with the rest of you. To get us started today, JJ and I are going to talk through a couple of the big digital marketing trends that we see making a really big impact in 2019 and really beyond. There's about 1 million things that we could talk about, from voice search to automation and machine learning and everything in between. But we picked a couple that we think are maybe a little bit less talked about or more specific than we kind of hear other folks talking about. So we're going to start with talking about multi-touch attribution, but not really necessarily solving the whole how to do attribution, what the best model is, more of our general thoughts on how it should impact marketers and how they should think about it. So JJ, why don't you kind of kick us off and talk about your thoughts on multi-touch attribution?
Sure, thanks, Jeff. So when it comes to multi-touch attribution, I look at it, it's a way to be more creative with your paid search. So paid search, as we know, needs to drive its own direct results, and that's not going to change. We need to invest dollars, we need to get X number of dollars back. That's direct response marketing, and that's the way it should be. But we also know that we're working in hyper-competitive environments. We're working in environments where costs are rising, and we have to fight harder for those conversions that we're going to get. So as marketers, we want to be creative. We want to be out of the box to get that advantage. So one way we can do that with multi-touch attribution is being able to use PPC to fuel other channels and fuel their success. So for instance, we're working with a client right now where we're trying to actually develop a community for their product. So they work in the gardening seed space, and they have a great content. They have great videos. They have great how-tos. And the question is, how do we use PPC to be able to build that community? And we know from evaluating and analyzing their other channels that email is a very strong converter for them. So what we want to do is be able to get people to sign up for this community, get their information, and then being able to come back through email and be able to convert these users and have them be regular paying customers, but also tying back some credit to PPC and being able to tag those emails down the line, knowing that we generated them from paid search, and being able to say that PPC drove, X% of that sale. It's just another way that we can expand the scope of PPC and, to use a metaphor, to be that extra gas that fuels the entire machine.
Sure. So that's interesting. That's less using multi-touch attribution as trying to figure out PPC's kind of impact on other channels directly. Like, does PPC drive, organic traffic or something like that it's not getting credit for? I'm more thinking through like wide range of the funnel, and can you impact top of funnel versus bottom of funnel activities within kind of the same channel, and then how do you get credit for that? I like that. That makes sense. One of the things that I talk about a lot, and I think one of the places we get hung up in, and I think we're kind of turning around this corner, but for a long time, people thought maybe attribution was going to be this holy grail. Like, there'd be some dashboard you could log in, and it would tell you exactly how many conversions to give, every channel credit for and how they overlap. And it seems like more and more people are understanding maybe it's not that literal. For example, even I work really closely with our marketing team for our agency services, and we kind of redefined our whole funnel this year in terms of it's not top of funnel, middle funnel, bottom of funnel. There's very little we can do to just make someone say, hey, I want to hire an agency today. I just decided, and let's talk, or something like that. Ours is a really long game of building really useful content, seeing how that content's landing with our different audiences we're going after, and really working on kind of a depth of engagement with them. At some point that we kind of know a certain level of engagement with us is a pretty good sign that they're interested in us. And so we do a lot of attribution for that and a lot of multi-touch approach. But what are your general thoughts when you think of attribution? How actionable do you think it is, and where do you think it's actionable? I mean, do you actually optimize accounts based on this information, or is it something else?
So we are able to optimize to a point. It still is a little bit difficult because, like you said, Jeff, it's not this black and white holy grail. If I have, these many assisted conversions, it's going to make something that looked like a poor performer into a great performer and changes the tactics of what we do. But what it really helps with, and this is so important to digital marketing and particularly paid search, it's the storytelling piece. And at the end of the day, we're dealing not with clicks and traffic, we're dealing with people, we're dealing with relationships. And people are coming in at all parts of the funnel. We see people coming in right at the end of the funnel and want to buy. We see people coming in at the top that are exploring and helping sorting out that picture so we can plan other strategy. What type of messaging? What type of landing pages? How do we want to target? What audiences should we go after? It doesn't literally mean that we have the answer in front of us, knowing if we have, this audience, this performance is going to be great. Attribution's not going to tell you that, but it further points you in the direction that you need to go. And with so many data points that are out there and so many possible directions, marketing managers need that little extra edge to be able to set the right course.
Sure, makes sense. It kind of reminds me that this really isn't applicable to everyone. So that's kind of the other, I think, maybe a myth of multi-touch or thinking about it that way, is that it applies to everyone. Some companies are like pretty quick response time really matters, and someone will make one choice and go on a landing page. The first person to respond to their lead or something like that will be the one that wins the business. I think a lot about like drug and alcohol rehabilitation centers. Like that is known to be really quick response time. Someone that finally reaches out, takes that step, and talks to someone, it usually is the ones that kind of give them the best, quickest, most comprehensive answers and kind of pulls them through the process, who that person ultimately chooses to go with. And so I think there's some industries that maybe it just is a solution looking for a problem, and if people in certain industries really focus on it, they're probably a little bit spinning their wheels. The other thing I think that happens, so for me, it's attribution or multi-touch marketing is way more about kind of budget allocation and media, less about going in and optimizing a keyword or an audience target or something like that. And I think of it more of like, and a lot of companies don't do this, is can you keep a blended CPA or CPL, whatever your goal is, the same while actually adding spend on top of it? And that spend on top of it may not directly be what leads to conversions, but it lifts the bottom of the funnel up for you. So you can use your attribution model to kind of understand how those things interplay with each other. But at the end of the day, someone's taking a really broad view of their marketing budget and a really broad view of the sales attributed to that whole marketing budget. That makes them much smarter about where to put their money. And I don't see, even a lot of our clients kind of struggle with it. There's not that point of person accountable for the whole book and who looks at the whole picture all together. Any last thoughts on multi-touch before we move on?
Sure. So I agree with you. And I think the other component of this is businesses move fast. So there's not always that patience level to work through the attribution, really understand that picture. And we've seen this with many clients. The pressure is, how do I get results today? How do I get performance today? There isn't always tomorrow or next week. So you really have to pick and choose of where you need to get results now versus where you need to look down the road a little bit. So it's all about the balance.
Yeah, I think balance is an important part of it for sure. Awesome. Well, as we were talking through this, we talked about machine learning and AI and all that, and it was kind of like, yes, this is going to continue to impact us. But you had an interesting angle, and so you're going to do most of the talking because you're way more into the weeds on this than I am. But you talked about how does campaign structure, or how does AI and machine learning impact campaign structure? We need to think about it different. There need best practices. So I guess take it from there. Like, how should we be thinking about campaign structure and our kind of new reality?
Sure. So this is something that I've been giving a lot of thought to. So, and also just from some personal experience, still being in accounts, often enough. And what we tend to believe is that machine learning is the holy grail. And this is going to be the game changer, and it's going to make good things great. It's going to make bad things really good. And we don't necessarily see that happen. I can't even begin to count the amount of instances where we've seen lagging performance, and we said, well, we're going to put it on machine learning. We're going to test target CPA, and we're going to test max conversions. And what we see is that performance actually gets worse.
Right.
And when I looked at that and I thought about that deeper, started saying, our account structure is really built for a machine learning age. Many accounts have built their campaign structures in the last 1, 3, 5 years before machine learning was online or really online. And now we have to adjust. And for instance, we have an education account. And this is an account where you have 50 different locations. Each location has a whole series of programs, but because they're local, no one campaign gets a lot of data, and machine learning needs a lot of data to really learn. So what we have to do is we actually have to take the account structure that's successful, and we have to think about changing it from head to toe. So for instance, this is, in order to get the big data, we need to line up intent. So if someone is interested in nursing, we can't mix them and treat them equally than someone that wants to be a medical biller or coder, or someone who wants to be an EMT. Different thought process. It's completely different audiences. So what we have to do is set up campaigns by program and say, even though they're from different locations, if we bundle programs together, we can get a lot of data. If we put all of our nursing locations, bundle them under one location, and we can get 1,000 clicks a day versus 100 clicks a day, the machine is going to learn that much quicker. Then when we want to put responsive search ads in place and we want to put in max conversions or target CPA, we have that much more data to work with, and we can have better outcomes. And what we're doing is we're trying to amplify success. We're not trying to take something that are disparate pieces and put them together. We're not trying to take something that's not working and just assuming that a machine is going to fix it. It comes down to strategy and getting outside the box and eventually breaking some rules and conventions, provided that you do it in a very controlled way. We're dealing with a lot of money. We're dealing with a lot on the line for our clients, but moving along those lines can bring us into the machine age and amplify success.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. I mean, the way, back in my days of pulling levers in accounts, the way most of the ways we think about a campaign structure was largely really twofold. It was, how granular can we get? Let's get as absolute few keywords per ad group, few ad groups per campaign as possible, so we have a lot of control. And then second to that, we really had to do more with reporting. So you would break up an account by program, by location, in your example of education, because then you could really easily run a report that tells you how every program is running by every location that's running in. And so it was much more about that. It was much more reporting driven and granularity driven. And what you're saying now is maybe you have to find another way to do your reporting in order, because you still have to get that insight. You still have to be able to report out on it. But you got to think, I guess, volume of data, because you're right. If you only have 5 clicks or 5 conversions, you can't make any decisions. So you got to think volume of data and use that to decide how you do your campaign structure and figure out some other solution reporting. Is that fair?
Absolutely. There's a technological component to that. There's a strategic component to how you're going to go about doing your reporting. It's also talking with your clients. You're talking about fundamentally doing business differently, to take it to the next level. So all that has to be absolutely considered, and you have to find a path to get there and know how you're going to get there before you make the first campaign change. Otherwise, it's going to be hard to report. The other thing you mentioned about with granularity, I struggled there because that's the way I learned, and I've had success with that, but it's much more about reaching wide audiences and learning as much as you can, and you learn with large data sets. So now we have to think about keywords that are a little bit broader in intent. Doesn't necessarily mean going to straight broad match and take every modifier off, but we have to think about, do we want to chase the tail, or do we want to get the insights that's going to lead us in that intent down that tail? And now with being able to layer like in-market audiences and other audience-driven modifiers that help us zone in on the people that are most likely to convert, then we can get those big insights, and we might be able to do it with less keywords, or you're going to need an awful lot of keywords drive a lot of traffic to get an overall picture.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, well, anything else on structure you want to touch on? I mean, I think that's really insightful and a very different way to think about a campaign structure. We're all used to being pretty serious control freaks, which is part of why I think that it's been hard for a lot of marketers to adopt machine learning and AI because they feel like they've lost control. And I was at Facebook's office the other day, and we were talking, they were asking us why we don't always use automation, when we choose to use it versus not, and talking through some of the new tools they're rolling out. And one of the things I told them is, as an agency or in-house, like as a digital marketer, your job is less about pulling levers like it used to be and more about finding insight. The problem is right now, even when they're targeting audiences and we're doing something like dynamic creative or something like that, no one has insight into what's working and how it's working. And so I'm hoping that's kind of the next evolution of this, is we can figure out campaign structure to allow the machines to optimize and do their job best, but somehow we get back some visibility into doesn't have to be how it's working, but into what's working. And so we can understand how to kind of use that cross-channel. If we learn something's working on Facebook, we can apply it to Google and vice versa.
And that's the whole name of the game. You had mentioned earlier about informing media buying. This is really an extension of that, and it's where we can place our bets, essentially. So yes, Google, Facebook, all of them will need to come up with more transparency so we can understand. It's very hard when it's black boxed and there's these data signals that are out there and we don't know what those data signals are and we have to infer a lot. So, in terms of account structure, it's, again, I go back to balance. Don't try to blow up your structure all up at once. Try to do it in very small pieces and components, learn along the way, and use what you think is going to work for your business. It's very easy to go consume content and say that is the way you need to do it. In an e-commerce account, it might be taking your best product campaign or creating a best product campaign because that intent's similar. They're at least the bottom of the funnel. Think about what works for your business. Really understand your business, the nuance of your business, the nuance of your market, and try to create a structure that reflects that.
That makes sense. Then just going off on a little bit of a tangent, another piece I think of the machine learning AI pie that people don't necessarily talk a lot about is, to me, really important because I'm a philosophy major, is the ethics and laws that are going to go around with it. So like we know right now, if we have a company that rents apartments, there's Fair Housing Act laws that they have to comply with, including not targeting people based on age and gender and occupation and things like that. And even not unintentionally doing those things, like only targeting zip codes that maybe have bias towards certain demographics. But if you just put that onto a machine's deciding that, and if they're only doing it based on performance, it would be really easy for machines to start having significant bias against certain segments that are actually illegal to have biases against. I think there's a lot of people talking about this stuff in Google and in Facebook because they didn't understand that this is a real thing. But to me, that's one of the more, I think, interesting thing that's going to happen over the next year or two. Do regulators and law enforcement just decide that, that's uncontrollable, and as long as there's not something core flaw with the algorithm, that's okay, and that's a different thing than, more intentional discrimination? Or do they decide you can't do that, and there's whole segments of industries that aren't allowed to use any of these tools? So anyway, that's a little bit of a tangent, but something I'm really interested in seeing how it plays out.
Yeah, a few months back, I did a webinar with Brad Geddes about machine learning, and we actually spent a lot of time talking about machine learning versus the law. And what we came out to is the law is always going to win, and machines haven't caught up to where the law is. And this is particularly important in highly compliant industries. Think education, housing, insurance, and especially with responsive ads. You can literally feed all your assets in, but if the word order's changed, you can have a non-compliant ad and you can be in for some very serious consequences. So you have to make strategic decisions when it makes sense to use the machine and when to go manual, because you don't want to get caught into hurting your reputation and then having your digital marketing under the scrutiny of your corporation's lawyers and have to get clearance every time you put an ad out or every time you target.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I mean, there's big fines associated for that. I mean, if you have an airline and you advertise a ticket price that doesn't have, I forget the number, but X number of seats available on a plane, like I think it's a 6-figure fine every time that happens. And so even if something like pricing gets a little bit off, yeah, big impact. What's going on the last thing? So one of the things that I've seen, and I'm curious how much you've seen it, is the increase in complexity. And what I mean by that, like in the old days, advertising agencies specifically create a lot of value by trying to simplify where you can place ads. Instead of an in-house person having to call every newspaper in the country, the agency would work out a relationship with all of them and have one place they can go and make an order. And over time, that's gone really simple in a lot of ways, and AI and machine learning has made it maybe even more simple. But at the same time, businesses themselves have become much more complex. So as a lot of them have looked for growth, they've done acquisitions. And a lot of times they acquire a brand that's very similar to them. And so you have kind of cannibalization issues that start happening. You also have the flatness that's happening to search. Like search isn't growing at the rate it was. Most people who are going to search are already searching. And so they may incrementally do it a little more every year, but that's not where growth is coming from. Google knows their growth is coming from YouTube. And that's a totally different channel than search. And how do you make that work? And if you care about year-over-year growth, like most of our clients do, how do you continue to find that in a channel that's absolutely flat and make sense of that? So, and then you also have privacy laws, GDPR, and California's law that goes into effect in 2020 that's more restrictive than GDPR and affects more people, or at least more Americans, more people in the U.S. and based in the U.S. that do advertising here. So potentially even bigger impact than GDPR, which, for us, took away visibility on 80% of our international traffic overnight. And then you just have privacy issues. So you have the issues that Facebook's had. You have issues where people are sharing information with third parties that they're not necessarily disclosing it or not being transparent about it. And people are getting pretty sick of that. And so while managing campaigns seems to be getting a lot more simple day in and day out, the actual business seems to be getting much more complex. You have thoughts on that?
Yes, I don't envy today's marketing manager because it's like dumping a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle set out on the table. None of the pieces match, and you have to make them fit. We're seeing with our clients the complexity of brands and what they're trying to do in their business and what they're asking digital marketing to do. It's building relationships. It's building funnels. In such a more complex way. It's really just a lot more difficult. The threshold for being successful requires less lever pulling, a lot more thinking time, a lot more how you're going to fit these pieces together. How do I take something like YouTube and even getting past the operational piece of how do I get videos made? How does this fit? How do I make this work? How do I justify it? How do I explain this to the CFO who only looks at if I invest $1, do I get $5 or $10 back? So the challenges, they're enormous to make the case and then fit all the pieces together and execute it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, JJ, I appreciate the time.
Thanks.
Putting up with me for 20 minutes or so that we talked. Reminder to everyone, that's it for JJ and I's session, but reminder to everyone, there's 4 hours, 3.5 hours more of conversation today. Follow along on Twitter on the hashtag PPC Hero Summit. We'll be making sure to answer questions there where we can. And up next, we have a session on automation, so we'll start soon.